Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is a special meeting. I'm sorry.
You ready, Mackie? Yeah. There you go.
Oh, okay. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is a special meeting for all of us, and I guess we'll get to know all your team members soon. But for the steering members, I would like to call this meeting to order. And our roll call is done. If you've signed on the paper that was being handled by Tony, then you're all set. We have a quorum. Has everybody read the minutes? I just wanted to know if there is any edit or any correction that you might want to suggest.
Motion to approve the minutes from the meeting of March 24th.
Minutes approved. Okay, take the vote. Okay. Okay. So there's somebody you need to admit.
So Tony, if you want to read the list and let people respond on the list, that would be the
To get up to the microphone, is this
Yes,
good?
please. Yeah, the list that we have it.
Michael Herbert. Peter Matchik.
Here.
This is for,
This is not for roll call.
this is for,
Meeting minutes.
Meeting minutes.
approve it, this is to
Yes.
approve the minutes. Mike, okay, Peter. Brandy, not here. Yolanda.
Yes.
Kate. Anna. Yeah, she's in the Zoom.
You.
Okay. Okay. Claire.
Here.
Okay. Okay. Roberta. Chuck Lids. Alan. Ed Berman. Stacy. Okay. Karen. Karen Coleman. She's on over there someplace.
Yes, she is.
Just skipping. Yeah. I was Tony Lewis. I was absent, so I abstained. Carl Atkinson. Steve Mitchell. He's on Zoom.
Can you guys hear us?
Yes. Now we can.
So it's actually very difficult to unmute ourselves. For
So-
some reason, I was getting some errors, and I think Steve might be getting them too because he's raising his hand.
I
Yeah.
couldn't unmute.
I can just to speak to this, Anna, town planner Peter Magic. Last night the select board got Zoom bombed, and so I'm making any member a co-host, but I have a very locked down security, and you're not allowed to turn your camera on, and I'm unmuting, and I'm making everyone co-hosts as they come in, and if I recognize you and you are part of the committee.
Got it. Just be aware for minutes that you can't really hear everybody, but we are here.
Okay. Moala. Beth Reynolds.
Karen
Karen
is,
gave a thumbs up.
Karen,
Oh, okay. You taking the notes, right?
no, I don't.
Okay.
Yes.
Nathan. Okay. Mike. Mike is on Zoom.
Yes.
Okay. good.
Yes.
Kara. Okay. Bill Navosky. He's. I was absent as well. Okay. Okay. The person that took over precinct 1, is this his first night, Jake? Okay. Okay. Leah Suarez. David Ivanko. Aaron Mano Haran. Rajashri.
Aye.
Lisa Hassini.
She said, Hasimi said a yes.
Okay. Oh, that's it. Okay, thank you.
Rob, you need to open our select board meeting as well, please.
It's are the minutes passed?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to welcome our newest member of our steering committee. Would you please get up and so that we can all wish you all the best? Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I had sent out an email about 2 dates. I would like a show of hands so that the Golsons get to put this on their calendars. So the 2 dates are June 13th and 25. That's one option. The option B is July 3rd and 18th. So if you're okay.
Just to clarify, it's June 13th and July 3rd, right?
Yeah,
And June 25th
Fi-
and July
18.
There will be 2 weeks between those dates, or weeks between those dates so they can collect the data.
right.
Can you repeat those one more time?
So in the month of June, it's 13th and 25. In the month of July, 3rd and 18th.
And so it's the 2 meetings in June? I thought it was a meeting in June and a meeting in July. It's a meeting in June and a meeting in July. Okay. So 13th and 3rd,
18th and 25.
25th and 18th, just to keep the system.
So there's 1 month, 1 day in each month, right? So we have to decide on that by the end of the meeting, yes?
Or if you can decide now, that might help, because then we can focus on the presentation. Can I have a show of hands for June 25?
Was it June 18th and July 25? Or was it June 25?
June 25. June 25. 25 is okay with you, David? Anybody else?
I can do the June 25 and July 18th. Same.
Same. So I think,
Show of hands for who can do July 18th and June 25th versus July 3rd and
June 13.
June 13th.
Okay. Those on Zoom, can you give us the dates?
Steve put a thumbs up to the 25th and the 18th, as did Michael.
Okay. So should we go with that? Is that a majority? It seems like that. Okay. Is that all right? Okay. Okay. So over to Rob. I think, Rob, you wanted to do something?
Rob just had to open the meeting, we just have to open the planning board meeting, then we'll hand it over to the consultants.
All right, I call this meeting of the Ashland Select Board to order at whatever time this is, 7:08. And I see a quorum present and virtual. Thank you.
Tricia Kendall calling the planning board meeting to order, also at 7:08, and I do see a quorum as well.
Okay, so at this time, we will hand it over to the consultants. Just for everybody on Zoom, just please note, just as a reminder, due to a Zoom bombing situation, I have made members co-hosts, so you can turn on your camera and you can unmute themselves. Any public, if you do want to speak, if we do open it up to public comment, you will have to raise your hand and I will unmute you and ask you to unmute yourself with your question. So thank you so much. So with further ado, I will pass it to the consultant, the Golson team.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so grateful to be here with all of you. And we'll get that PowerPoint up. Pete, is that something you're doing? Okay, perfect. So just as by way of introduction, you'll hear from each member of our team just as they're about to present. We thought that would be a little less cumbersome than having everyone come up one at a time and then present later on. But we're really excited to have our representatives from our full team here. As you know, most of the time you see me, Katanase, and Brenna at these meetings, and we're the J.M. Goldson part of the team, the prime consultant. But we have all these wonderful technical experts doing things a little bit more behind the scenes so far, and we like to kind of bring them in at really important milestones. So they're here tonight, and we're very grateful that they're here. We also like to bring the planning board, select board, and the committee together once at the end, essentially to kind of mark the end of each phase, so that we can share. This is what we've learned. These are the next steps, and so each of the 4 phases you'll see will ask for a meeting like this. And we think it's important for accountability. We don't want the planning board and the select board to get a document at the end of the 18 months and have had nothing to do with it before then. So that's why we're here tonight. We spent the first phase really trying to understand Ashland. And you may have, just raise your hand if you've already seen the profile summary that we submitted. I don't know when we did it, a few months ago. Okay, some of you, but not all of you. So that's certainly a document that you can look at. It will have a lot more information than what we're presenting here tonight. And even that summary doesn't have all the information we gathered. We also collect all the data for each of the areas of the comprehensive plan in Excel spreadsheets that we just share with you because we think it's important for you to have all the data. But we just pull out the pieces that we think are most interesting or important to share the story of how we're seeing trends and issues and opportunities in your community. But you have access to all of those Excel databases, or spreadsheets rather, as well. So if you're really into the data, you can find all of it there. All right, so let's go to the first slide. Oh, it's right there. Perfect. So we'll spend most of the time, you'll see this is not a brief presentation because we want to make sure you hear from all of us, and we'll kind of hit some of the key pieces of trends and issues that we've seen. And then we're going to each end with what I like to call sometimes a wicked question. Like it's basically a rhetorical question that we're not expecting you to answer right now, but through the course of the process, you may want to think about. Is this something that we want to grapple with? And so that's how we'll end each section. And there may be other wicked questions that you can think of, but these are just some that our consultant team thought of when they're really looking at what are the trends, issues, and opportunities. Does that make sense so far? Okay, perfect. So, and then at the sort of at the end of the presentation, we'll just go through where we are right now in the process because we've already launched phase 2 and you may have seen a lot of engagement opportunities out there. So we're going to give you an update on where that is, what you can still do to help with that process. And then I think you may have some time to ask questions and discuss the presentation after that. All right, next slide. So what we'll just do very briefly is share the schedule in terms of where we are right now. So we've basically we have 4 phases. There it is. The first phase was yesterday and today, just trying to get an understanding of where you've come from and where you are now, and that's what we'll be sharing the results of tonight. The second phase we're kind of in the middle of. It's helping the community by providing you with lots of different kinds of engagement tools to help the community envision the future. Where do they want to go? So we call that Ashland Tomorrow. And then once we close that phase out in a few months, and that's part of that pair of meetings we're trying to do, that's when the committee is actually writing the vision and goals themselves. Based on what community members are telling us through those engagement tools. Once we close that out, we'll go into the third phase, which is achieving Ashland Tomorrow. So you know your vision by then, you know where you want to go in a very broad way. And achieving Ashland Tomorrow is what sometimes people are waiting for. They want to get into the strategies. What zoning changes are we going to propose? What capital improvements are we going to propose? What kind of programs could we have? That's the third phase. And then at the end, that'll bring us into 2025. At the end, we'll basically be pulling it all together into what we think will be a very beautiful plan for you. And that'll be the first time you'll see it all together in a more of a master plan, comprehensive plan format. All right, next. So I'll just go through generally what this summary profile, we call it, includes, and then each member of our team will present the section that they worked on. Next slide. And I believe this is available on our website, so anyone here is welcome to look at that summary document. And it includes all the normal things that a comprehensive plan would include. So you can see the list here, and we'll go through each of these sections in our presentation. So we have demographics is actually one section, housing is another section. We have economic conditions, transportation and mobility, historic resources and cultural resources. For open space and recreation, we actually called it, for open space, we actually called it open spaces, natural resources, ecosystems, and sustainability, because we know it was really important for Ashland to integrate sustainability and natural places. So we thought that was an appropriate place. But you'll see as we go through the plan, that will probably start to weave through lots of elements. And then we have municipal facilities, assets, services, and recreation is there. And then at the end, we'll talk about land use and zoning, which sort of pulls it all together in a lot of ways. So let's go ahead and, so what are these based on? So we collect a lot of data. Most of it's open source data, a lot of census data. You can see a whole list of, sources that we've used. We also use local knowledge. We work very closely with Pete and his staff to collect a bunch of, different information that we've kind of woven in. Next. So we're going to start with Brenna Trollinger, who is from the J.M. Goldson team. She's going to talk about population and demographics. Brenna?
Hi everyone, I'm Brenna. I am a planner with J.M. Goldson, and you probably recognize me from a lot of our committee meetings. So I'm going to start us off today talking about population trends and the demographic makeup of Ashland. So Ashland has seen...
If you could just adjust the microphone.
Yes.
When we're watching and hear you better.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. So since 1980, Ashland has seen a pretty significant amount of growth and is projected to continue growing by about 6,000 residents by 2050. Next slide. And so when we look at the breakdown of this growth, we see that older adults ages 35 to 65 will sort of be driving this growth pattern, as well as senior citizens 65 plus. And these age range breakdowns are pretty consistent with county and state comparisons. Next slide. And so over time, Ashland has also become increasingly diverse. And since 2010, the percent of the population that's Black, Indigenous, or people of color has nearly doubled. And with that information, it's also important to note that there are some equity gaps in Ashland where Black households are earning less than their white counterparts in 2020, and that can also be seen as women in Ashland are earning less than their male counterparts. So this is also important as Ashland is an environmental justice community, which are communities who have historically faced more negative environmental impacts than others, and this is typically determined by things such as income and the percentage of minority residents. And so Ashland is considered an environmental justice community based on both income and presence of minority populations. Next slide. So as we're thinking about growth and change in Ashland, that sort of leaves us with a few questions in the fact that Ashland is growing, and we should think about how Ashland can welcome new residents as its growth occurs. And we should think about how this increased number of residents may put strain on municipal services. And so how can Ashland continue to provide a high level of service for these new residents? And then in terms of environmental justice and equity, Ashland is increasingly diverse, and with that, we should ask, how can we put these equity issues and how can we uplift marginalized voices within the planning process? Okay, thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I think I'm going to put my mask down so you can hear me better. So favorite part for everybody today in my presentation is housing. My name is Katanay Spas. I'm with JMG, and I am the housing and equity planner for the company. You've seen my face several times as well. Pete, if you can go to the next slide. Alrighty, so we're talking about population changes and what does that mean for the actual development that's going on in town. So as you see here, there's a map talking about development over the last centuries. Most of the developments actually happened between 1980 and 2013, and since their inception from 1846, those two generations, that's really when the development picks up. But you'll see here, the little red dots on the map are the 1700 to 1799. But all of this orange, I would say mid-orange colors, that's all the new development going on in town. And you see it's very spread around the town itself, whereas the older buildings are really spread through the downtown of Ashland. But if you go to the next slide, please, Pete. What does that actually look like in terms of makeup of housing? What's the tenure or the type of housing? And so you've actually built a lot more multifamily housing than your neighbors of Holliston and Sudbury. So kudos to you. You'll see here that also you've built more multifamily in the county. So Ashland here has about 60% of multifamily housing in 2010. I'm sorry, 30%, and that goes up a bit to, I would say, like 45% or so. Currently, you have about 50% of single-family housing, so that also ticks up a bit. You'll see that in the Middlesex County and in the state, you're just a tad bit over the multifamily, but you're also a tad bit over the single-family. So you're kind of balanced a bit, but still much more over the Middlesex County and the state. You'll see also, oh, sorry.
I thought that was a few.
No, you're okay. About 25% of residents are actually renters as well. So the uptick in multifamily housing has also meant a decrease in single-family housing, and the makeup of homeownership has decreased as renters have increased. All right. And you'll also see that there's been a shift in household size. So over the years, there's also been smaller households, including home sizes. So there are a lot less 4 to 5 bedroom homes than there used to be, and that kind of reflects the household sizes going from 1 to 2 and 3 families versus 4 to 5 and up. And so you can't talk about housing without housing costs. And so you've probably seen yourself how much housing has actually increased in town and also in the surrounding area. And so cost burden is one of the terms that we use to look at how much affordability or non-affordable is the town. And about 1/4 of families or people in town are cost burden. So that means that they're spending 30% or more on their income on housing. You'll see from the rest of the pie here that this is the rest of the breakdown between the lower income family households. And so about 70% of those who are low income or extremely low income are actually spending 50% or more of their income for housing. And so that actually takes away from other things that you need to pay for your family: household insurance, food, transportation, all of the things that you don't necessarily think of when it comes to bill time. And then more into housing affordability. So we looked at also just rent changes over the years. And as you've seen, rent increases has actually increased 94%. So back in 2013, it was about $1,100 a month for rent. In 2022, that's $2,200. And you're actually higher than your neighbors of Holliston and Hopkinton and Sudbury as well. This also goes into housing sales and affordability of home ownership. So currently your median household income is about $124,000, but you'll see here to actually afford a home, you'd need $241,000. That's double the income already in town from the median household income. You'll see also from the chart that the actual single family price has been $735,000. So there's a $515 gap to actually what folks can afford with the median income household and what homes have actually sold for. Slide, please. And so that goes into your subsidized housing inventory. I know that there's a lot to that, and I'm going to try to condense it into a little summary as much as possible, but the SHI is basically a way of looking at your low and moderate income housing in the town. And so the state currently has a mandate of about 10% for all municipalities. And you're currently at 5.83%, which is about 435 units. You need quite a bit to get to the 10%. I know you all can do it, but you're still underneath the threshold. And a couple of your developments actually fit into the SHI. So you'll see that the Village of the Americas is a homeownership area that counts in SHI. And then the 12 Pond Street is a rental that counts towards the SHI. So SHI includes both rental and homeownership. And so this really makes you think about what does affordability look like and how can you increase your SHI, which includes the ability to create affordable housing so that you have more affordability in town. And how can you get to that 10%? And then again, as the population increases, you'll also have more folks in town. They'll have different housing needs. And again, affordability comes to mind. So what measures can you take to increase affordability for folks who are not only in town already, but folks who are coming into town that might need some more affordable opportunities? So that's about it for my presentation. Thanks.
Got to bring the mic up. Hi, everyone. I'm Eric Halverson. I'm a principal with RKG Associates, and our role on the JM Goldson team is the economic development component of the plan. Thanks. Ashland's a really interesting place in its land use composition, and also, I think, from my perspective, the opportunities for where economic development activities, business activities, commercial activities, industrial activities are taking place in the town today, versus the sort of composition of the town as a whole from a land use perspective. When Jen's team gets to the land use section of the presentation at the end, you'll see a lot of open space and a lot of land that's dedicated mostly to, the single family housing and also to residential. But the map that's up on the screen shows the sort of geocoded locations of where business activities are taking place today. And as probably no surprise to many of you, it's, along Pond Street, and it's kind of in the area that we are in right now, which is the downtown in the new corridor area. But as I was looking at those two, they're very different in the businesses that they support and the economic development activities that are going on there, and sort of the size and the scale of commercial development or other types of business development that's in those areas, and something that when we get to the questions that we put together, I wanted to think a little bit more about. But it's really kind of those two areas that I think we're going to be thinking about as we go forward with the plan. Next, please. And, to no surprise, this is sort of happening all across the Commonwealth, but also all across the country. Ashland's unemployment rate is 2%, which is extremely, extremely low. Labor force availability, workforce availability is pretty much at almost an all-time low. We hear about it almost every day, and Ashland's no different. But what is kind of interesting about Ashland, and probably as a result of so much of the town comprised of sort of non-commercial land in the community, is your job growth has been slower than both the county and the state as a whole. About 6.6% job growth, or about a little over 700 jobs in the last 10 years. And it's been interesting, as I was looking at that, I was thinking, well, okay, it's interesting to know too, where has that job growth actually occurred? Because that kind of helps to sort of paint a picture about what's happening in the community. And a lot of your job growth has been in sectors like retail, food and accommodations, general government, healthcare, construction was also another big industry sector. So that then leads me down the road of, who's working here versus who lives here and works is a really important question. So we started looking at that, and that's sort of what the color's a little faded, I apologize, but we started looking at that. And what we noticed is a lot of folks who are working and live in Ashland, and you'll see it in some of the demographic data, they're really high income earners and high income households. And that's been changing over the last 10 years. Those folks have been coming in a lot more so than lower income households and lower income earners. And that also corresponds to the educational attainment of the folks who have been coming in over the last 10 years. Those two things usually go hand in hand. So what we saw in the commuting pattern data is that a lot of folks who live here are leaving the community to work. They're mostly in professional, technical, scientific, service jobs, finance and insurance, so much higher paying, which reflects the high household income here. But interestingly, the jobs that you have here, you need to import workers because not a lot of people who live here actually work in the jobs that are here today. So that not only has implications for economic development, it has implications for housing, also has implications for transportation and traffic and how people are moving in and out. But if we think about the jobs that are here today, they tend to be in lower paying industry sectors than the folks who live here and are leaving. They tend to be in the higher paying jobs. The people who work here can't afford to live here. Over that last 10-year period from 2013 to 2023, the average wage of 82% of the jobs that were grown here over that 10-year period was about $51,000 when you adjust for Massachusetts high cost of living. as you just heard in the housing piece, your median rent's $2,200 a month, and you need $240,000 a year to afford the median for sale price. So there's no way you're going to get that as a single person or a single earner household at $51,000. So although I'm talking about economic development, it has ties to a lot of the other components of the plan itself, particularly housing, and how do we try to support a place where people can live and they can work, whether they're here today or they want to be here tomorrow. So that kind of leads me to two of our questions that we come up with. One is, should we start to rethink the land use and the zoning framework along Pond Street corridor? I know this was, the Cecil Group did a study on Pond Street 10 or more years ago. The infrastructure is in place, or is very close to being in place now. Is it time to sort of look back at the zoning and start to rethink that now that some of that infrastructure is in place? And the other one is, how do we maximize some, like what I would consider to be the fairly limited land resources that the town actually has for economic development? And I think if you haven't seen the numbers yet, you'll see them in the land use piece. They're very small. And probably the most important question is that actually a priority for the town? Thanks.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Mello, and I am a transportation planner with Kittleson and Associates. You may have interacted with my colleague Sonia earlier in the process, and she'll be back in the loop in future phases, but I'm excited to be here tonight, especially because my mom actually grew up here. In the 1960s, she and her 4 siblings grew up on Warren Road, so excited to be here tonight. And I'm going to be talking about transportation and mobility in the town. So, next slide, please. When we look at the overall trends in Ashland, looking at census data for how people get to work, we can see that nearly 3/4 of residents commute in their personal cars. And this probably isn't super surprising. We also see that the percentage of residents working from home has nearly quadrupled since the last census in 2010. And I think we can all understand probably why that has gone up. If we compare that to the rest of the county, it's actually a little bit of a bigger increase. But there's definitely folks that have changed their commuting patterns since the pandemic. Despite just over 1/3 of residents living within a half mile of a transit stop, so whether that is the MBTA commuter rail or the regional transit authority bus routes, only 6% are taking transit to work. So there's all sorts of reasons why that number might be low. Often it relates to the frequency of those transit services, access to the stops, but that's just something to think about. Next slide, please. So transportation and safety obviously go really hand in hand. I know that safe streets, pet infrastructure came up as some really critical issues early on in this process. Between 2018 and 2022, that 5-year period, there were just over 1,000 crashes in Ashland. And you can see on this map, they're really concentrated along the major routes in town. So Route 126, 135 in the downtown area, particularly crashes involving people walking and biking are kind of concentrated in that downtown area and at the Main Street and 135 intersection. The majority of those crashes are just resulting in property damage to vehicles, but there were nearly 20% that resulted in some sort of injury. And so one of the effective ways to increase safety on our streets is using complete streets design principles. So for those who might not be familiar, that's an approach to the way we plan and design our streets and then the way we maintain our streets to really provide safe access for all users. So not just people driving, but people walking, biking, using mobility devices, really people of any age, any level of ability. So Ashland is a participant in the Massachusetts Department of Transportation's Complete Streets program. They've received funding on Complete Streets projects over the years, and some of those are in process, and they're continuing to kind of work down that list of prioritized sites. So that is one way to really improve safety on the streets here. All right, next slide, please. I skipped. Here's an example of some of the sites that have received funding or some of the projects that have happened. I think most folks in this room are probably pretty familiar with what's going on in downtown and some of the other projects that have been developed from the list in 2018. Next slide, please. So when we think about transportation facilities, beyond our roadways, there are sidewalks around Ashland. They're a little bit scattered, though, you can see in the map. So the network has some gaps in it. They're in some key neighborhoods and places around the town. But there's certainly some areas where you might not have access to that dedicated infrastructure. When we look at trails, those are really limited to the paths in some of the state parks and the town forest, but I know there has been a lot of momentum around the Upper Charles Trail extension, a lot of great work around that project. I'll get to that, back to that in a minute, but thinking about bike facilities as well, those are also limited, but there are bike facilities in development, and that's something that I know is integrated into a lot of those complete streets projects. So to touch on the Upper Charles a little bit more, we can stay on this slide. So the proposed extension, that route was approved in 2019, and that was after there was a committee formed in 2014, and in 2017, the town worked with a consultant team to look into the feasibility of that extension. And if that comes to fruition, it's going to be a really great way to connect a lot of key places in the town. So both the middle and high school, the MBTA station, the state park, Market Basket, some really important generators where people are going to want to be able to walk and bike and get there outside of their vehicle. There's been a lot of progress lately, kind of chipping away at that vision. There's a long way to go, but really important progress has been made. The Trolley Brook Trail, that section opened in 2021, and there's other sections too that the town has worked to acquire and kind of work on. So we know that it's a long road ahead, but there's a lot of important work happening to realize that vision. All right, and I will leave you with 3 questions for reflection. So first, just thinking about the larger trends in the area. We know that most people are driving to work and driving in general around town, but how might the town prioritize other modes of transportation, particularly walking and biking, not just for recreation, but also for getting around to the places that we need to go? And then next, thinking about safety, I think. Can you help to that one? Perfect. Oh, sorry, transit. So again, compared to the region, there is a slightly lower percentage of residents that are taking transit to work. So how can the town increase access to these existing transit stops and routes especially by foot and by bike, and therefore hopefully encourage some ridership of those routes? And then lastly, again, thinking about the Upper Charles Trail, like I said, that could have some really important impacts on connecting key places in the town. But in the meantime, how can we make some of those connections better, more comfortable, more safe for folks? All right, thank you.
All right, you get me again. Hopefully this musical chairs makes it a little more interesting as well. All right, so I'm going to talk about cultural and historic resources. So you can go to the next slide. And what we learned is you actually do have a lot of historic resources. And I always like to emphasize to communities that we're showing a certain number of resources that have been identified and surveyed, but that's almost never the full amount of historic resources that you actually have in the community. It just means that you've gone out and had the ability to survey these. But it's often sort of just a proportion of what you really have in the community. So what we found is that you have 232 surveyed resources. If you're curious to find them, you can go on the Massachusetts Historic Commission website, and it's very easy to search under Ashland, and you can find all of these. There are no local historic districts, despite I was confused when I first came because I saw the signs downtown. I thought, oh, there's a local historic district here, but there actually isn't. And what I mean by that is it's actually a protected area that the state recognizes. It's a very specific program that would give a historic district commission the authority to review every exterior change that you can see from a public way on private and public property. And so you don't have that here. Next. You also have a demolition delay bylaw, which is one of the best practices in historic preservation world, especially in the Massachusetts area. And you just strengthened that so that you can now have a year, basically a year delay on a historic resource if somebody tries to pull a demolition permit and your historic commission determines that this is an historic resource that they want to put the stay of demolition on, then you have a year to figure out, is there a way we can save this building or move the building or incorporate it somehow into the new development proposal. And you also, I believe this was also part of the newest change, you have now a rolling. So sometimes communities say anything older, I don't know what your original time frame was. You can shout it out if some of you know. 1950? Okay. So communities will sometimes say anything older than 1950, as an example, will be considered potential to have a demolition stay, pending review for its historic significance. But it's actually, and I think it's smarter, because as we march on, the years change, and things that we thought when we first established these weren't historic become historic eventually. So now you have a rolling to 70 years, which makes a lot of sense. Next. So looking at cultural resources, you have a lot of very active sort of events and cultural of coming together and community building. And there are several components to this. The farmers market, Corner Spot, which we have the photo of. And when we first interviewed, there was actually some program going on. So we were able to kind of see it firsthand. The library, and then other spaces that may be at religious centers or other places. And so those are all very important for kind of the cultural health, I would call it, of the community, which is really about celebrating people who are here, bringing people together. Next. And so your questions for reflection, the first one is really about, how much do you want to do with protecting private historic resources, other than the demolition delay? And you've certainly been very proactive in going out and trying to acquire, historic resources to save. But there aren't a lot of tools in place, like a local historic resource, as an example, which is kind of the primary way in Massachusetts we can protect private resources. There isn't much else that you're doing right now. And I guess one of the questions is, do you want to? And the answer may be no. Or the answer may be yes, and that's why I bring it up. Next. So the other question I have is just around Indigenous peoples and Indigenous histories. How might Ashland expand community understanding, respect, gratitude? There's lots of different ways to do that, and I know you have some resources that you've identified. I have, a picture of the Devil's Den here, but there may be other ways that you can honor that culture as well. Next. And then we have a question for reflection around cultural resources, and so I would say that Ashland has a rich cultural infrastructure, but you also have you have a lot of growth that's projected in the future. So you're going to have, Brenna said before 2050, you're probably going to see another 6,000 residents. You're also becoming a much more diverse community. You saw that socioeconomic diversity doubled, essentially, if you look at the BIPOC population. And so what does that mean for cultural offerings? Are there ways you can strengthen your offerings? Are there ways that you can strengthen offerings and facilities to embrace new growth as well as cultural differences and further build community? So again, rhetorical questions, not expecting an answer tonight. Next. All right, so I think I'm done here. Yes, and now we're going to introduce Brian Creamer from Niche.
Hi, good evening all. Just a little bit closer. My name is Brian Creamer, work at Niche Engineering. I'm here to talk to you tonight about two separate but obviously linked topics. One about open space, natural places, sustainability, and then separately about municipal facilities, recreation resources, and how intricately linked those are to all the rest of the topics you've heard about tonight. If I could ask for the next slide, please. So the map you're seeing up here indicates how much open space exists in town today. About half of the total land area of Ashland, about 4,000 plus acres, is characterized as open space, right? Or natural lands. Of that half, about 25 or a quarter or so is permanently protected, right? That has a protection or a restriction on it, where take a Article 97 or an act to change that, but it's largely not going anywhere. The other quarter would be considered unprotected open space. That some is owned by the state, some is owned by the municipality, and then some, a vast majority of it is owned by private entities. Could be nonprofits, could be private landowners or institutions. If we go to the next slide, that's a little bit more about the unprotected. So the unprotected in sort of the darker red color is the open space that we're concerned with per se, but want to be mindful of, as all of the other competing resources, competing interests you've heard about tonight from other presenters, might want to consider other uses for that land, but make it housing or industrial uses, and what level of priority is it for Ashland to continue to acquire or permanently protect open spaces contiguous or separate from the other open spaces in town. The other piece I wanted to go to is on the next slide. So of that unprotected, I think it's important to note that you control about a quarter of that. So that those municipally owned, unprotected parcels equate to about 430 acres. And about 188 or 10% of that is within your sort of rail transit district or around the rail corridor itself. Go to the next slide, please. Another piece I want to talk about land, but also about watersheds. So I think it's important for us, particularly at the comprehensive scale, plan scale, to think carefully about where that land drains to, and what water resources are impacted by the land use patterns that we that will change over time. So a vast majority of the town certainly drains to the Sudbury River. The green hues that you're seeing there are the watershed areas that drain to the Sudbury, and then the yellow, basically the Warren Woods and southeast portion of town, actually drains to the Charles River watershed. I wanted to call out and highlight some of the more recent work that's been happening, both with the city of Framingham and residents in Ashland, about Washaken Pond. The vast majority of the Washaken Pond watershed, is certainly within the boundaries of Ashland, but I want to point out, though, the water quality and pond resource work that's happening, that's been grant funded as well as volunteer based to protect and restore the quality of that pond and its waters. Next slide, please. I also want to commend, really, of your peer communities and the communities I work in, you're really doing a fantastic job with attacking and promoting an idea of sustainability and reducing your carbon footprint, both for municipal uses and private uses. And you've all set a very intent and aggressive goal by about 91% reduction from 2017 levels by 2050. And the way we get there, the roadmap that you've all developed over the recent years, largely relies on electrification, transitioning to electrical vehicles, and that's sort of in line with many of the other strategies that we're seeing in other communities. And I think puts you on the right path for a 25-year horizon to decarbonization and reducing, Ashland's carbon footprint. And next one. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Nyanza site. I do not want to be up here talking about that I'm an expert in brownfield or Superfund site, but it is a critically important aspect of your town and how this cleanup process has been over the last several decades and how it will continue in the future. We understand the importance of the residual contamination work that's happening with Mass DEP. Is anticipated to continue in all the work that's happened in recent years with the bipartisan infrastructure law to continue that work. Nope, that's great. Yeah, next one, thanks. So, some of the key questions. There's obviously been a lot of talk tonight about how development pressures are going to push into some of those unprotected open space parcels that were highlighted on that second map there in red. How critically important it is to identify and prioritize adoption and protection of certain parcels, and how that overlaps with topics such as habitat and corridors and really key watershed scale moments of land protection that can have downstream water quality impacts. Next slide. And to keep with the theme and really sort of keep beating the drum of how critically important it is that Ashland meet those goals of 2030, the benchmarks of 2030 and 2050, as you go on the road to reducing carbon footprint. How are those? There's going to be a lot of pain points there. That both the town as an actor and the town as an advocate will have to coach residents through, incentivize residents to adopt. And we'll leave it at that. Thank you. So secondly, and certainly linked, are the municipal-owned facilities, services, and this runs the gamut from the cultural and public resources that Jen was referring to, including the library and the corner spot, all the way through your athletic fields and those things specifically, as well as your utilities infrastructure. So we're going to highlight a couple key moments from the existing conditions report. If you could, the next one, or profile. Sorry, I said report. But so some of the key findings that we heard through the interview process and getting to know your town a little bit better were three key moments. Were that the Pitway School, is obviously kudos on the Mendez School. It is a really great resource. I'm glad it's opened up pretty well. The Pitway School is obviously one of the more aging elementary schools. And updating and that resource is an important consideration of a capital planning, as well as the town's DPW site, and then certainly what to do with aggregate industry site, potential acquisition of that, and when that lease comes due in just a year. Next slide. I also wanted to highlight the overall population projections that we were showing, that Brenna was highlighting at the beginning of this. That also comes true for school-age populations as well. So what you're seeing there is projections from the New England School Development Council of an increase of approximately 390 or so students, or about 14% increase over the next decade. That is going to put a strain on elementary school populations, but really throughout the district. Thanks. I want to talk through briefly about sewer rate. So approximately a quarter of residents are currently still on a septic system, either because of topographic issues or just not in connection to the Mdeburi sewer system. But the majority of residents in town, about 75%, are connected to the Mdeburi system. That was coupled with an increase in sewer rates back in 2022. I don't believe there's been one since then. I don't think there was one this year. Just did a couple. I missed it. All right. Apologies. So there's another one recently, and we recognize that there's a relatively high cost burden for the ratepayer. I want to talk through what the strategies are to either mitigate those costs, mitigate the burden on the ratepayers, and how that's benchmarked with peer communities as well and going forward. The next slide. So a key question. How does the town really accommodate those additional capacity, all the growth that we're talking about at these, new residents over the coming decades, and how are those residents connected to either, wastewater treatment plant in town or the Mdeburi sewer system, and what kind of rates are they paying? And then lastly, next slide. How are the bipartisan infrastructure law or funds that need to be expended in the next 2 years going to impact and help the deferred maintenance concerns as well as new capital needs? I think that is my last one. I'm going to turn it back over to Jen. Thanks.
All right, we're almost through the whole thing, so hopefully you're still paying attention, not getting sleepy. So we'll talk at this closing section about land use and zoning. So let's go to the next slide. So you can see we looked at what is your current land use, how is your land used, and we looked at what percentage of your land has single-family homes. This is not zoning. This is how is the land used, what's built on the land or not built on the land. So single-family is about 33, a little over 33%. Multifamily is about a little over 6%, and you can go around the circle. I'm not going to read every single one, but you can see that this also highlights what Brian was talking about around the percentage of protected open space and unprotected open space, which is, you can see open space is about half of your community's land area right now, but a lot of it is unprotected. And a smaller sliver, you can see that it says limited protected open space, 1.51%. That's probably parcels that are enrolled in one of the Chapter 61A tax abatement programs, which gives the town some right to acquire under certain circumstances for fair market value, but it's a small amount of land. All right, next. So the current zoning code really prioritizes more single-family home growth. 2 and 3 family homes are allowed on about 16% of your land, and you can see that chart on the bottom. So the big blue line is about 76% of your zoned land allows single-family homes. About 10% allows 2 families, and about 6% allows 3 family or above. And this is by right, by the way. So do people know what I mean when I say by right? So you don't need to go and ask for a special permit or any kind of special review. You can go to the building department and basically get your permit to build. That's what we mean when we say by right. And you can see you can't do any accessory dwelling units by right. So that's just something we wanted to highlight for you. Next slide. So has anybody come across the term build out other than looking at our scope? Okay. So we looked at your total land, and we looked at how it's zoned, and we looked at parcels that are undeveloped but zoned for something, whether it's single family or commercial development. And we looked at also properties that could potentially be redeveloped. There's a kind of a formula we use to just see, is it kind of ripe, or is there a marginal use on the property, or perhaps the property's not fully used in the way that it could be. So we also looked at that. And what this is telling you is not what will be built. What it's telling you is what your zoning says could be built. And so when we look at all the developable land or redevelopable land, what we're getting at, we're going to give you 2 figures. The first one is how many residential units could you build by right under your zoning. And then I'm going to show you how much commercial and industrial property square footage you could build. So the first figure I have here is 323 residential units could be built given your current zoning. And it's a pretty small proportion of your total units. I actually have it on a note that I can't see right now, but it's a small percentage. I can get you that when I sit down, and I can look at the note in a minute. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see the industrial and commercial. So it's about 2.8 million square feet. And you can see this kind of highlights what Eric was saying. You don't have a lot of areas that you could really build on right now. You could see basically the red, you can see that probably more clearly on this map is showing areas that you could build new commercial. And then the lighter, that gray color, are areas that you could build industrial. All right, next. And so the questions, I think I have 2 or 3, I can't remember. So one question is, given that population growth that's expected, about 6,000 new residents, if you look at the current household size, average household size, about 2.42 people on average live together right now. So household size, just how many people do you live with? Do you live alone? Do you live with 4 people? And then the census basically gives you an average. And so if you just look at that, and let's just make an assumption that about the same household sizes will stay, that will stay true in the next few decades. I don't know if that's true or not. It could be that households continue to get smaller. We could see a different trend happening, but let's just take that as an assumption for the purpose of making a calculation. You following my logic? So I want to know, well, if you're going to have 6,000 new people and the household sizes are about 2.42 people, how many units might that be to accommodate that level of people? And it's about 2,500 additional homes. And so you can see that disconnect between what your zoning says you can build and what you might need, given those assumptions, and those are big assumptions, and they might not be 100% correct, but you're way off. And then the other piece to think about is that since most of that zoning is probably saying to build single-family homes, you may consider is that a conflict with your open space goals? Do you want more open space to turn into single-family homes? There'll be a great market pressure. And what happens when we have market pressure but not enough housing? I think we all know the answer to that because it's all over the news. There's a supply and demand problem, and housing costs go way up. And so Cadnace talked about both the rental and the ownership costs, and the reason it seems so unaffordable is because even though maybe you felt like you have built a lot, it's also a regional issue. So there's lots of factors at play. But that's a red flag for us when we look at what can you build under your zoning, what kind of development do you want, and how much unprotected open space you have. So we're not telling you what the answer is. But we just want you to think, how can Ashland ensure it allows the market to produce an adequate amount of housing supply to meet population demands? And then the next slide gets at, there's a large market demand for housing. Ashland has 1,420 acres of unprotected open space that's privately owned. Brian went through all of these different figures. That's the amount that's privately owned. Now, what I don't have up here, which I actually want to understand this better, is how much of that land is environmentally constrained and can't be built upon. We actually do know that because we did the build out. I just don't have the number here. But that's the other question for you. But then the question I have here on the slide is, how can Ashland best balance its need for that additional housing production with open space protection? And how can land use policies improve so that you can grow in a sustainable way? Brian mentioned your decarbonization efforts, but sustainability also has a lot to do with land use. People will drive more if they live further out, if they don't have ways to get around very easily, if they're not clustered. There's also a lot more just eating up open space that provides natural tree coverage and absorbs carbon. So does that all make sense, the way I'm framing these questions? Yeah, they're big questions. All right, next is, that's it. All right, so now we're going to have Cadnace, I think, come, or is it Cadnace or Brenna? I'm sorry. Who's giving the overview? Okay, perfect. So Cadnace will close us out with what's happening right now.
Alrighty, so we're in the thick of engagement right now, which is our phase 2 of all the 4 phases. And so I think most people here are from the committee, so we all know what's going on. But for those who are new to this, we have about 3 different tools that we have during this engagement phase. There's the community survey, which basically asks general questions to the community about what they want to see in Ashland, what are some issues we should tackle and address. And then the crowd map, which really is a fun interactive activity where you kind of pinpoint what you'd like to see in the different parts of town, whether that's fun and play or work or things of that nature. And then there's also the meeting in a box, which is take a meeting, have a meeting with family, coworkers, friends, whoever, and give your thoughts in that way. And so we're in the thick of it right now. We have about a week left of engagement, so really push to make sure you're trying your best to get to as much of the community as possible. But that's what we have so far. Go ahead. Thank you. And so Brenna was very kind to update the numbers for what they look like today. And kudos to you. Congratulations. You've reached 2,033 participation points, which is a very good number. So pat yourself on the back. So far from those participation points, you have 1,267 survey responses, 556 responses from the crowd map, and then 210 participants from 38 meeting in the boxes. I understand that there's more meeting in the box notes out there that we still haven't collected, so if you have them, please make sure to give them to us so that we can transcribe them. And then this equals to 72% of your goal. So you're on the right track, keep pushing. And then we just wanted to shout out the folks who have actually given us our, some meeting in the boxes. So if your name is up there, congratulations and kudos to you. If your name is not up there, get in your competitive spirit and try to get it up there. But that's so far what we've gotten. And I think if you go to the next slide, Pete.
Nice.
Yes.
May I just chime in?
Yeah.
And you may have said this and I didn't hear, but I just want to make sure you understand this engagement goal does not need to be completed next week. The engagement goal is for the entire project. So you have 2 more phases to continue to gather. So the fact that you've reached 72% of your full project engagement goal in this phase is actually amazing. You have another week left and I would really continue. Does that make, oh, can you guys not hear me?
No, we can hear you. We're just surprised. We thought that our engagement was just.
Well, if you can, that's wonderful, but really you have the whole project to get that done.
Jen opened up the can of worms, you know. This does not mean that you can slow it down. This just means that you've got, so phase 2 is the biggest portion of our engagement phase. That's really where you're going to get the bulk of engagement points. This next phase in 3 and 4, you'll get some in there, but it's not going to be the same as the second phase. So keep pushing to get those engagement points up and get closer to your goal, because there will be an opportunity, like Jen said, during this whole process, but it won't be as large as this point. Yeah. Next slide. Thank you. And so as I mentioned, our deadline for engagement phase is 26th of April. And so after that closes, we'll be able to take all of the responses we received through the crowd map, the survey, the meeting in the boxes, and summarize all those things and analyze them and put them together with a nice bow for us to talk about our conversations around vision and goals and core themes. So now that we've chosen dates, we can go ahead and put those on the calendar and we can start working towards that. Yeah, so that's about it. So thank you all so much. Ooh, great.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yes.
How is Holliston doing?
Oh, let's see. They, last I know, were 400 and something surveys, but they only did 5 weeks of engagement.
All right.
So if you keep pushing, I mean, you're already beating them, but
Okay,
their engagement phase is over.
We gonna open up for questions or?
Yeah.
Okay, just as a note, everyone who's gonna ask a question in the room, the only way to have the audience here is to come up to the microphone, up to the podium. And then anybody online, if you do want to ask a question, just please raise your hand and I'll call on you via Zoom. So we'll start in the room. Does anybody have a question? Yeah.
Do I give my name and address?
No, yeah, I don't think you
Tricia Kendall, I'm on the planning board. And in some of the meeting in the box questions, maybe one in particular, it had about things that come into conflict, I think, between two things you might want, or synergies, and there's another word for it. So the big question for me is about housing, maybe coming from planning board, both in two respects. I mean, on the one hand, I hope that most of the residents of Ashland are welcoming to other people, of all different types of people in our community. On the other hand, I have heard many times from different sources, not one more unit of housing in Ashland, too much, right? Which, is another impossibility, right? But how do we start to balance, and I don't think that's a question for here, I'm just wondering if that's, I assume part of your process, that how do you balance those two things? Like, we have all these 6,000 people that are expected to come in, and we have at least sections of the community that are saying, wait, our schools can't handle this, the parking's already bad, the traffic's already bad. How do these two things, how do they mesh, right? And especially in light of, as we know, 40B projects just in the last few weeks that we know are looking at our community. And does this process continue to take into account these things that happened 2 weeks ago, that are now going to be things that we as a community have to address? Is this part of the process as well? That's kind of a big question, but I think it is a big question.
And let me see if I can tackle it.
Thank you.
So the process is really designed to pull out those synergies and tensions I think you were talking about. We start by, obviously tonight we were trying to point some of those out to you as well. And then in the meeting in a box and also the crowd map and even the survey, we'll start to understand what are people feeling? Where are they seeing those tensions? And we can guess at some of the things that we might hear, some of the things that you mentioned. Then as we go into having the committee, we do feel it's important that the consultant doesn't come up with those answers for you on how to balance. We can come up with, well, if you want to do this, here's a way to do that. That's, either through zoning, through changing your land use, or through different type of capital improvements, or, we can look at best practices, we can give you case studies, we can give you technical information. But we want to have the vision be written by you. We're actually quite different in that way. As a team, we feel it's important that as a committee that you take all that feedback that you're gathering now. We'll help you digest it, but we really want you to then come up with, well, how do we balance that? How do we see that people are concerned about X, Y, and Z? How do we come up with a 10 to 15 year vision that acknowledges those tensions and starts to kind of tease that out and put it into that big overarching vision? Once we understand that from you all in the next few months, then we'll start to look at, okay, well, if that's the way you want to start to balance this out, and I don't want to give you examples because I don't want to bias what you come up with, but there's probably lots of different approaches you can take to try to balance those tensions and also recognize those synergies and reinforce and leverage them. But once we have an understanding of that future vision, and the next step actually in meeting 1 in June 25th, that's what you'll be doing. Then on July 18th, which was the second date you picked earlier, you'll be focused on the goals. And the goals, we like to encourage you to start to think about measurable goals so that they can really be something you can actually track. So you may say, and I don't take this as a recommendation. This is purely an example of what you could say. You could say, in the next decade, we want to create X number of housing units, and we want them to be in this kind of housing typology, and we want them to be in this general location or locations in the community because it helps us do these other things. So I'm hoping I'm trying to be abstract by I don't want to put words in your mouth, but does that make sense the way that I frame that? That's what the second meeting is about, those goals. And we try to get you to think about, what either percentages or actual numbers or just that you want to increase something. Maybe you don't know the number in July. And that helps you become very concrete when we start to think about in phase 3, well, how do you do that? How do you create that number of housing units, and how do you do it in those locations? Or how do you preserve that percentage of unprotected open space? And what areas do you prioritize? And of course, looking at your existing plans, your open space plan and whatnot is going to give you a lot of answers as well in terms of priorities. So that all kind of layers on itself. And then our phase 3, when we're helping you with strategies, the how do you do it, that's when we start to really look at those trade-offs and look at your capacity, and we bring in working with the department managers as well as various board and committee representation to really balance out what's feasible here out of all these different ways you could go about reaching these goals and this vision. What's actually feasible, what can you do, what other funding is out there, and we'll help you with all of that from a technical point of view. But we try to provide that framework so that you can actually make those decisions yourself about how do you balance it out? That's a kind of a long-winded response. I hope it seems like I was answering your question in an effective way.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. I think Anna was next.
Yeah, so next up, Anna. Anna, can you please state your question?
Sure. Thank you, Peter. Anna Tesmanitsky, I'm also on the planning board. I appreciate that that answer, which I think leaves us as the committee with a lot of empowerment to figure things out. And I have two questions that are kind of my way to step towards that. One is, in order for Ashland to meet its 10% affordability requirement, if you will, by the state, and no longer be vulnerable to 40B, what is the official number of units right now that we need to get there? And my second question is, if we zone or work towards building fully subsidized housing as a town, not private development, but actually public development, are we limited in meeting those 10%? In other words, can we, for example, build it fully for our elder community, or does it need to be multi-generational?
Yeah, thank you.
Those are my two questions.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, thank you, Anna. I'm happy to answer those. So CADNACE is going to pull up the exact number, but you have 435 units and you're at 5.8%. So it's probably somewhere around 400, maybe a little less.
Yeah,
right?
I won't do the math now because it's going to take a bit, but it's about 800 units or so.
800?
So
Total.
Total.
Right,
Yes.
so
Yeah,
the
so we're-
difference, yeah.
Right, so we're at 5.83%. So if we were to just round up there, that equals 435. So if you were to round it up, it's about 800 total units to get to your 10%.
Total that you need, so it's
Yes.
probably around 400 or something, it's the delta. We can get you the exact number, Anna, I'm sorry, we just don't have it at our fingertips, but that
Okay, I
gives you.
think that would be helpful for the committee.
Yeah, absolutely, that's easy for us to do. In terms of your second question, you really can't build housing that restricts to, residents or very specific populations. You really want, the other piece of this, you said, can the town do this? Can the town build subsidized housing? That's pretty difficult for lots of reasons. And what I would recommend is you really look at your zoning and then using 40B strategically to help the private market really raise those funds and use their expertise. And you're going to end up with probably mixed income. You're going to end up with probably intergenerational housing, probably not all age targeted. And that's really what we're seeing a big need for. But also, if you just look at fair housing issues, you really want to open up housing as broad as possible for lots of reasons, including that it's probably best for the community as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Steve Mitchell, you have your hand up next. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Great, thank you, Peter. So a question, actually it's a two-part question. There's been a number of recent articles about net migration out of the state and kind of the demographics by which folks are migrating. So number one, is this a problem as far as you see as consultants? And if so, how do you factor that into your projections?
So we rely on state projections essentially, and I know that I don't know all the factors that they look at, but I do know they look at more regional trends. I don't have a specific answer as to how that's factored in, and I don't know, Brenna, I know you had put together the demographic section if you recall specifically, but that's all I can say is that it's, they look at these bigger regional trends, but I don't know specifically how the formulas will work.
Okay, it just seems to me that, there's enough of a concern out in whether it's the economic development arena, the employment arena, and so that it would be something that would be factored in some level. I would ask or suggest that maybe you get a little bit more information on that for the committee.
Yeah, sure. We can look at the projections that we've used and I think give you a little bit more information on what they factor in and yep, CADNACE is taking a note on that.
Yeah, we use the Mass DOT projections, and I think the Donahue Institute also provides some projections, but because they're looking at the future, it's really variable, and so what they're based on is like usually the census, and so even now from 2020 things are already looking pretty different, and so it's hard to get more specific, especially looking out several decades. So I don't have a specific answer for you, but we can gather more resources.
Okay, great, thank you.
Do you want to say something?
No, of course, I'm sorry. Please, thank you, Eric.
Definitely.
Hi, Steve. This is Eric from RKG. Great question. If you've read the Globe the last month or two, you've probably seen 3 or 4 articles about this. Just speaking for myself and our experience in the region, I think it's a huge problem. Our communities and our workforce are aging, and Ashland is no different. What we're also seeing is a net out migration. They call it domestic migration. So those who live in the state now and then are migrating either mostly to another state within the U.S. or maybe even out of the country. They tend to be our working age residents between the ages of 25 and say 44. Research that we did maybe about a month ago, we looked specifically at Suffolk County, which is generally Boston. The folks who are moving out of Boston, who are domestically out migrating, are our highest income workforce. They're typically earning over $100,000, $125,000. The folks who are coming in, and I don't say this as a negative, it's just the data. You can take it how you want. The folks who are migrating into Massachusetts are typically international immigration, and the incomes that they have are very low. But they're critical to supporting and sustaining huge swaths of our economy. So that's why I say it's not a bad thing that they're coming in. We need those folks. But we also need to retain the folks who are leaving because they're a different segment of our economy. So unless the folks who are coming in with less education and less training, unless we can get them trained very, very quickly or educated very, very quickly and moved into the jobs that other folks of the working age are vacating, we're going to have this imbalance and it's going to continue. This is not a COVID-based trend. Massachusetts and many other states in New England, we're doing a ton of work in Connecticut, exact same issue as Massachusetts. In-migration is dominated by international immigration. Out-migration is dominated by domestic, and it tends to be high-income earners. They're just going elsewhere. I would just say it's difficult to say what the reasons are. People come and go for a whole bunch of reasons. Family reasons, personal reasons, relationship reasons, money reasons, job reasons, housing reasons. So I think as a community, it's important to try to figure out what can you actually address as Ashland and what role do you want to play and can you play? Because I think as someone mentioned before, a lot of these are regional and state and even sort of Northeast challenges. So we're going to have to tackle them as mega regions or as states. But I think as part of the comp plan, we'll want to think about like what could we actually do as Ashland or what are we comfortable doing? And like how can we be part of the solution both locally but also regionally?
Yeah, well, just to follow up to that, is that I suspect it might be more specific to certain locations and maybe not affecting all locations, but it also seems is that you've got a prime wage earning group that seems to be the bulk of the migration out of the community, out of the state. And I think that's got certainly huge implications. And clearly it's related to the cost of living in Massachusetts. I'm sure you've seen the article the other day, $900,000, I believe, is the average house in Metro Boston. Do I have that correct? So
Yes.
You can see the pressure on, the cost of living. And, it's, again, I don't know how you factor all this into, the projections that we're going to base our comprehensive plan on. So I appreciate your answer. Thank you.
So I think we have a couple questions in the room, so I'm just going to ask you to proceed to the microphone. I will not call on you.
Everybody, Michael Herbert, Town Manager, not in a suit tonight. So I just had 3 points. First of all, thank you for your presentation. Thank you for putting all of this together. It was really good. I had an opportunity to look at the documents, but seeing it up here on the screen and having you present it really kind of brought a lot of it to life. Number two, I just think it's important to tie in, and Steve started going in this direction, is that at least what we're hearing from the state is that we need to build more housing because we have this outmigration of people, you know, these high-income, high-skilled workers who can't afford to live here. And so the concept, or at least the theory is, the more housing that's produced, the more it will drive the price down and people will stay here. At least that's the theory, right? That's what we're being told. And then finally, I just had those SHI numbers and the 10% numbers that Anna had asked. And I think it's important to note for everybody here that 5.8%, that is a real figure, but it's also important to note that there have been a number of units that have been permitted that have not been built yet for several different reasons. And actually, a few of those include the development on at 100 Chestnut Street, which I believe 18 of those units are going to be classified as affordable. 501 Pond Street, which is 120 units, 25% of which are affordable. And since they're rentals, you get to count all 120 units towards your subsidized housing inventory. And then also, several years ago, the zoning board permitted the Arbella at Ashland project, which was an age-restricted development on Magunko Hill that's 180 units. That was a 40B, and 25% of that was affordable, and so you get to count all 180 units. Unfortunately, those latter two have not been built yet for several reasons, but once those are done, we actually are at our 10%, just barely over it, at 10.09%. So I just thought I'd present everybody those numbers. And Pete put those numbers together, so if they're wrong, blame him. So, but he did it several times.
Okay. Mark Story, 49 Hawthorne Road. Informative. Saying things, but to me it's the housing is not my cup of tea. I want to get more business, so I'm going to be going down Pond Street and the municipalities combination. What would be a scenario if businesses have more permits in the spaces on Pond Street? Would that be a balance act to go by? Can anybody answer that?
In what vein, Mark?
In what
Can
vein?
you explain a little? Can you unpack that one for us?
Okay. Pond Street was a dream years ago, about 10, 20 something years ago, and what it was going to be a business and commercial highway through to get the economic up here for the town. It's good highway through the town, through the state and stuff like that, but the businesses has been going in and out of some buildings on some lots. What percentage of buildings on Pond Street only can be attractive for that if you can view what's there at the time?
I don't know if that was part of the scope of this first phase, Mark.
Okay. Can there be in the future down the road for open space ecosystem and before build out single family houses that can have a mixed use in each for economical and future business growth?
So looking at combining housing and retail or commercial uses as a mixed-use projects, is that what you're?
Not in retail, but in green, climate control, local state college graduate, business master's degree in the sciences and stuff like that. can that be a growth aim?
A growth aim. I think so, yeah.
So why is it all been about the single-family housing and not using it for that?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Hi, Catherine Jerzyk. I'm also on the planning board. I have 2 questions. I tried to take notes. I didn't get all the housing, but since housing is on everybody's mind important, in the calculations, so we are MBTA community. We are currently studying MBTA zoning. I don't know what'll happen in town meeting, but let's just say it does pass. That will be by right 1,124 units. So we should at least be updating and factoring that in conversations. And then I wanted to find out, so this June 25th meeting, which will provide information to the July 18th meeting, how can we get or what did you build in for like a public check-in? Because our committees really, I mean, we tried to be representative, but I mean, there's no way that 29 people should be completely speaking for the town. So I'd like to find out how either between the 25th and July 18th or after the 18th, we can check that the way we're kind of heading does meet the intent of the public.
So the work sessions on the 25th and July 18th, they're not necessarily your words. They're the words coming from the community that we've collected through the various tools and engagement phase. So that's one way that you're reflecting what the community is really wanting from this process. And then we'll also be having a community comment period after we've done completing the vision and goals and core themes. So there is a back and forth with the community around what work you're doing as a committee and making sure that that reflects what the community continues to want to share with us.
Okay, I heard there's a community comment period, not a committee comment period.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Chuck Lids, and I'm Vice Chair of the Sustainability Committee, and I want to begin by noting that you need to work on that part because the town meeting voted to be net zero by 2040.
I hate to ask, I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part? I missed
Thank you. The town meeting voted to be net zero by 2040, not 2050.
Thank you.
You're using state things, and I'm not saying we're going to do it. God knows I'm very aware of the difficulties. The second observation I'd have, of course, if we're going to have X number more residents only if we build the housing. By the way, I'm all for building the housing. I'm not trying to, but saying we're going to have 6,000 more residents, who knows? We could have 10,000 more residents if we built the housing. And now I've forgotten what my question was going to be. Anyway, thank you. By the way, I think this was a spectacular report. I really do. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bill Nowakowski from Design Review. You mentioned that about 25% of the populace is cost burdened and a health emergency away from financial disaster. Do you have the data to determine what percentage of those people in danger are renters?
We do have them in the workbook that you have access to.
Okay.
I can try to bring it up in a little second.
Okay. Also, have any differences been made between people who are renting in, say, 2 and 3 family homes, and I emphasize family and homes, as opposed to the big boxes that are going up on places like Chestnut Street and 12th Pond, et cetera?
So do you mind just stating that question? Sorry.
Yes. What percentage, have you broken out the percentages between people who live in 2 and 3 family homes versus the people who live in the big box structures that are going
For
up
cost
in town?
burden?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have that data, but we can show you the rental versus owner data.
Okay, I'm just concerned because, you know, what passes as affordable in some of the newer developments isn't affordable. So,
Yeah, part of that is all affordable housing is calculated by the 80% AMI. And so the area median income really encompasses a large portion of the land and not just Ashland or the
No, I understand.
communities around it. So a lot of municipalities have had the issue of, is this truly affordable and for whom? So I think that's a general question that a lot of communities struggle with.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm David Ivancho. I'm the representative of the 3rd Precinct. Question I've got for the data you guys got on housing. Do you have, I don't know if this was captured in your analysis, like housing based on like square footage per home? Just kind of curious how many homes might have in town that would be, just picking a number like with under 1,500 square feet that might be considered like a starter home or something that would be more attainable for a new family, or just because I know a lot of stuff that has been built that is single family in the last few decades has tended to trend larger and, you know, is much more out of reach for folks coming into the market. I'm just curious, be it single family, townhomes, apartments, like, do you guys have that broken down by square footage?
I don't believe we have it.
No, we didn't look at it by square footage. I don't know if the planning department's looked at that at all with assessor's data.
I don't think we have either. No.
Is there any chance we could get that?
I think first off, you got to look at the assessor's data to see how it breaks down.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if the data is there, we can try to dig it out, but you're only as strong as your own data when it comes into the circumstance, right? So you have to first go and see, obviously, how the assessor's data is organized.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, thank you guys. Love the report. Thank you.
Thank you.
I remembered what my question was going to be. When you were thinking about open space that's potentially developable, did you take out of that wetland area?
The short answer is no. It's by parcel, and that's what Jen was hinting at in the land use section too. An overlay that we intend to do is to sort of take out the undevelopable portion of the open space that is unprotected.
I know.
I get that right?
Around me, there's a lot of open space,
yeah.
but you can't develop it.
Yeah, and so Brian's analysis didn't do that, but our build-out analysis did consider environmental constraints. So we could add that layer into the report or to our presentation. Yeah, we do have it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Claudia Bennett, I'm a member of the Select Board. Thank you very much for your presentation. I enjoyed it. As you can see, I think a lot of what we're discussing these days is housing and how it's going to impact our community. And I just wonder, of late, I personally have been feeling a little bit like there's a lot of things that aren't in our control. And here, we're bringing our community together for their feedback and what they envision our community to be. And yet, how do we align what the things that we don't control with what what everyone is envisioning? I feel like we come together and we're in a little bit of a vacuum, and then some of these things don't come to fruition the way we plan.
Yeah, that's a great process question. So part of the committee's job and then ultimately the planning board and the select board will be to add a layer of, your perspective from what's going on things that you can't control. We can also help just in terms of technical advice and assistance with that. But the reason we have the committee write the vision and the goals, as Cadney said, we want you to take the words of the community when they give you their engagement results, but we also want you to add your own perspective from your understanding of the community and what's going on and what's realistic.
Thank you.
Rajeshri from Precinct 5. Wonderful presentation, so thank you for that. But what a tease. I want the answers to the questions that you send out. One of the things that I've seen through the 6 MIABs that I've done And then looking at Brenna's document, I see that the responses have been the maximum among white women, 70% and above, all through the weeks. And here we're talking about the fact that there has been a change in the demographics. So there is this discrepancy, and how do we as community members reconcile with that and take that idea forward? Because we're saying, okay, there are some people who are coming into town and who are going to be BIPOC or whatever else. How do we adjust that in our reporting?
Yeah, thank you, Rajeshri. So what we typically recommend is looking at, I know Brenna's been giving you weekly reports with advice, and we look at the demographics reported in the survey in particular, and trying to do some targeted outreach around, especially around if there are events in those, in communities you're trying to reach, if there are also groups that you can pull into the meeting in a box. It's a really great way to try to offset if there are any gaps that you're seeing in the survey. You can continue to do that in the future phases, but we would, advise that you work hard to do that right now as well. And I don't know, Brenna, if you have on your fingertips kind of what some of those gaps might be at the moment. Rajeshri mentioned that in the meeting in a box, you were seeing mostly white women participants.
Yeah, and I will say white women typically, we see that across communities. It's not just you guys, where women in general are more active and more engaged. And the percentage of white population overall is more represented. So that's not just a problem in Ashland. And I also will say that there is a huge caveat with this data, and we're only collecting demographics at the very end of the survey. So the numbers reported are for people who made it to the end of the survey and chose to share that information with us. It's totally voluntary, and these other groups may be better represented in places we're not collecting that data. So it is hard to extrapolate that across all engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Because I know you guys have been doing really great work, especially with the meeting in the boxes, to target these gap communities that we talked about in the network mapping assessment. And so we do have some gaps, but those are really only reported in the survey. So I don't want to put too much emphasis on you have this huge gap when that's not necessarily the reality of the whole picture.
Does that make sense?
I'm still troubled by the discrepancy.
Yeah.
Stacy Grant Lewis. I represent the Cultural Council, but this is not a Cultural Council question. First of all, great presentation, very informative, and like Rajeshri said, it's very much a tease.
Recording stopped.
To the rest of this, but my question is about
recording in progress.
The surrounding, the surrounding employers around our area, because our community typically, or in the past, has been a pass-through community, a bedroom community where people, like you said, work elsewhere. So if how their behavior of the surrounding employers that are not reflected in the data that you showed, like of the Raytheons and those large employers, how that's impacting the influx of people coming into town and their needs. I know that even today, although Google isn't headquartered here, but they are certainly sending their employees to different countries. And so that affects, people leaving their community. So I just wanted to know if that's worthwhile to look at, or is my question clear?
Do you want to weigh in on this one?
I'm just going to ask for clarity. So is your question about commuting patterns, like
right,
for Ashland residents, and where are they going?
Right. Yes. So that's partially the question, and the influx of people who might be coming through to live here if they're going to surrounding employers, and if that's worth looking at.
Got it. I think the way that the community is structured in terms of its residential versus job opportunities balance, sort of the jobs housing balance. Obviously, this is a bedroom community by and large compared to some of the other surrounding communities, Framingham. I mean, even Natick to a certain degree. When we looked at so I think the way that things are structured today, unless something radically changes, you probably will continue to be a place where people reside, not necessarily where more people are coming to work than who live here, versus a community like a Framingham, for example, where there are a lot of people, whatever it is, 70,000 people who live there, but they have a ton of jobs too. So unless something radically changed in Ashland, I think the trajectory may continue to be the same. You might see some slight fluctuations. When we looked at the commuting data, we can look at it by Ashland residents who work and where they commute to on a daily basis for their job. It was pretty interesting to look at like the top 10 locations for that. It was number 1 was Boston. It was also Cambridge, Newton, Waltham, places that are not near here. Framingham was in the top 3, so that is a big draw for people who live here and are engaged in the workforce. A little bit of Marlboro I saw in there. So again, I think to your point, it's like people come here, it seems like to live because it's an amazing community to live in. There's a lot of reasons why people want to live here. But then that jobs base, especially the jobs in professional technical services that are in the Bostons, the Cambridge, the Walthams, even, up near 990 in Framingham, places like that. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but we did look at that. And I think what I interpret you were commenting on, I think is accurate. Sure. Like people live here and then they're going out. But I don't know if I helped or I answered your question or not.
Yeah, I just wanted to see if we could get more granular and who exactly, like the surrounding large employers, how that impacts, the housing needs and the things that we can control in terms of like offerings for the town and how do we want to go economically, like things like that. So I don't know if it's worthwhile to even dissect that further.
Go to the mic.
Can I just ask, can I keep going or not?
Yeah.
Can you restate your question?
Just 1 minute, pal.
So just so I can try to understand a little bit more, let's say MathWorks continues to grow in Natick. Are you saying what is the impact of that growth on Ashland from a residential perspective? Thank you.
Okay. Peter Matchett to Joe Mignani. Joe, did you have a question?
I did, and thank you, Peter, for acknowledging me. Joe Mignani, 2 Harper Lane, a member of the Select Board. Thank you for the presentation. It answered a lot of the questions that I had. One of my concerns is that I believe it was on the first slide when you were talking about your goals. I think there were seven items that you had up there, and I believe the very last one had to do with planning and zoning. To me, right now, that should be foremost. One of the most important things we should be looking at, especially where we're being, bombarded with these different projects that are coming into town with new growth. Don't mind the new growth, but we need to be able to moderately handle the growth so that the town grows with the growth and can keep up with the growth. We've had this issue back in the early 90s. When the condos were going crazy and we had a difficult time as a town catching up to the growth. And I think that's one of the issues and hope that's something that you folks will address for the future. And I strongly believe that we are way behind when it comes to zoning. And I hope that you folks will really discuss and put forward the inclusionary zoning bylaw that needs to be addressed to help give us another tool to help fight this bombardment of projects that are coming to our town. So I don't know if you have any comment on that, or is that something that you folks are going to do? But I appreciate all your efforts so far.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'll make just a couple comments. Absolutely, planning and zoning is at the core of what the strategy ideas will be kind of focused on. And the second point I want to make is the order of the the topics was in no way reflective of priorities. I typically
Okay.
put land use and zoning at the end because it ties a lot. As you noticed, I referred back to what a lot of the prior presentations included, so it kind of ties it together at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. And Peter, just one last thing. I didn't mean to interrupt the young lady, but if someone needs a follow-up question, if they could get to the microphone, because we couldn't hear what that follow-up question was in her response. That's what I was trying to get attention for.
Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have one person online. Anna, Anna, you have your hand raised. Please state your question.
My question is regarding economic development. Are there particular economic trends in our area? You mentioned Marlborough and Framingham appear to be attracting job growth. Should Ashland be thinking about rezoning in a certain way to attract a certain kind of business to kind of fit in with what's happening in Metro West? Are there economic opportunities for us as a community to think about for the next 10 years, 10 to 15 years as we grow, so that we can augment our tax revenue more commercially rather than being just a bedroom community?
Great question. And yes, that'll be part of the goals and strategies component of this. And also, we'll be working with Jen's team too, because I think some of it, the build out needs to probably inform what can get built where, and then tie back to the prior question that we just heard around land use and zoning. So one example is with COVID, we saw a huge boom in like transportation and logistics warehouses, which can range from 150,000 square feet to 3 million square feet in size. Those require a lot of land, both for parking of semis, access, and just the general size of the building. So if we were to look at some of the available, say, industrial parcels that Jen had shown on the build-out map, and we don't, and I'm just making this up, but let's say all those parcels were 3 acres in size, we're probably not going to target a large facility like that. But when we look at industrial and manufacturing, maybe there are other kinds of niche manufacturing that maybe have barriers in the zoning or require special permits or have really high parking requirements. So we can look at those things and try to reduce the regulatory barriers to economic development. In Metro West, there's a lot going on. There's been actually a pretty fair amount of that industrial logistics. Up until the last year or two, things like lab was going, but I'm not sure that's really a great option at this point in time. Medical office and medical manufacturing, device manufacturing continues to also be a strong point in Metro West. So we'll be looking at all that stuff, as well as, you know, maybe you want to have some more walkable commercial nodes that are supported by mixed use, right? That's another way to have economic development, just at a very different size and scale, right? Supporting small businesses, local entrepreneurship, in addition to the large businesses and players that we might be thinking of elsewhere in the region.
And is hospitality still a hotspot in Western Mass, or is that impacting this area?
That I will have to look into. I'm not sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Scher, the current Select Board Chair. And so one of the things I want to do kind of ceremonially is thank you all for being here and just kind of reiterate our support for this process, and thank all the work of the folks in the steering committee for going through this. And we started this, a year and a half ago was an idea. And it looks like it's going strong. I do want to say, as someone who's kind of wrestled with all these issues as a municipal official for going back for more years than I at the moment care to remember. You know, I think you've hit on this existing conditions report, you hit all the kind of major issues that we've been dealing with. You know, the themes of sustainability, walkability, transportation, housing, economic development, quality of life. I didn't actually hear that term very much, but you know, in a community like Ashland, that's really an important. That's why people come here. It is a bedroom community. It's one of the more blue-collar towns in this area, and you know, I really appreciated your. I think you got it right in terms of the housing and our record in housing in this area. We have been the housing provider for Metro West, really, besides say Framingham and. You know, Marlborough. So, I did want to hit on, just kind of thank you all for your efforts and the efforts of the steering committee. And I think, going to some of the questions, I feel like you've put together a great framework for these folks to work on, because to come out of this, I really want to emphasize the need for concrete tools. And as you can see that, events are always moving, we're always behind, a step or two behind, right? So now we have 240B projects we're dealing with. And so all the kind of numbers you're putting together, all of a sudden they're outdated, so, I think this is a great process, a strong process, and it really gives us hope for the future. And I just want to emphasize coming out of it with strong tools that we can put in effect, because we've talked about many of these concepts on and off for years. I've been open space, how to protect open space, build out, things like that. The idea of having the need to have concrete tools and specific numbers, and then coming out of this with things like a sidewalk plan, and a complete streets priority list that's, kind of institutionalized. So I want to emphasize that. And as you folks get into this process and start putting together these concrete recommendations, ask for whatever resources you need and the tools you need to get that straight. And, so that's where we are, racing against time as usual. But anyway, thank you. Yeah, that's all. I left my notes over there.
Okay, everyone, we have about 5 minutes to go in the meeting.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes to go in the meeting. If there are no remaining questions, I make a motion to adjourn. Second? Okay, motion to adjourn. Okay. All those in favor? Okay, nobody opposed. All right. Nice. The motion is passed. Items committee that you have for the next meeting, we're scheduled for May 16th, so you can just email those to us, okay?